To surviving another year with the unbearable mother-in-law, my daughter-in-law said, lifting her wine glass high enough for everyone at the Thanksgiving table to see her smile, bright and practiced and just sharp enough around the edges to cut. Laughter followed. Not loud. Not cruel. Just enough. I kept my own smile steady and reached for the gravy boat as if she had complimented the sweet potatoes instead. The dining room smelled like roasted turkey and sage stuffing, like cinnamon and the faint smoke of candles burning too long. I had arrived 3 hours early that afternoon to help. I basted the 20-pound turkey every 30 minutes, mashed 5 pounds of Yukon Gold potatoes by hand because Olivia said the mixer made them gummy, and polished the silverware she only brings out when guests are present. My son Daniel carved the turkey now at the head of the table, his sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, eyes fixed on the cutting board as though precise slices required absolute concentration. He did not look at me. Ethan, my 8-year-old grandson, swung his legs under his chair, unaware that anything unusual had happened. The rest of the guests, Olivia's sister, a neighbor from down the street, a co-worker of Daniel's, smiled politely, unsure how much of the joke they were allowed to enjoy. I passed the cranberry sauce to the left and reminded myself to breathe slowly. Unbearable. It was such a small word. It could almost pass as humor if you didn't examine it too closely. I examined it anyway. This house, with its open-concept kitchen and quartz countertops, stood because I wrote a check 5 years ago for the down payment when Daniel and Olivia said they were just a little short. The dining table we sat at was the one my late husband and I bought for our 25th anniversary, solid oak, built to last longer than most apologies. The china beneath the turkey had once belonged to my mother. I had driven 45 minutes in holiday traffic with those plates wrapped carefully in towels so they wouldn't chip in the trunk of my Buick. None of that made it into Olivia's toast. She means it affectionately, Olivia's sister added lightly, swirling her drink. Every family needs a little drama. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with a linen napkin and nodded. Of course, I said. My voice sounded even. To my own ears, measured like I was reading a recipe. The truth is, I have been called worse in quieter ways. Sensitive. Over-involved. Traditional. Words delivered gently, always framed as concern. Olivia prefers to operate in the spaces between statements. You must be tired, Margaret. Maybe let us handle the holidays next year. Daniel works so hard, he doesn't need extra pressure. Small adjustments, small exclusions, each one almost reasonable on its own. If you stack them together, they begin to resemble something else. Ethan leaned toward me. Grandma, what does unbearable mean? He whispered. I smiled at him, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. It means someone who loves very loudly, I said softly. He seemed satisfied with that answer and returned to his role. Across the table, Olivia adjusted her phone against a glass of sparkling cider. A red light blinked. She was live streaming, of course. Thanksgiving with the Collins family, #grateful, #blessed. I had learned to notice these details. 100 small eyes on the other side of a screen, watching her curated version of gratitude. I wondered how many of them heard the word she chose for me. Daniel finally cleared his throat. Mom's always been passionate, he offered, as though that smoothed anything over. Passionate. Another safe synonym. I took a sip of water and felt the coolness steady me. Years ago, after my husband passed, I promised myself I would never argue at a holiday table. I would not give anyone the satisfaction of labeling me difficult. So I listened. I watched. I catalogued. Olivia laughed again, lighter this time. Oh, she knows I'm kidding, she said, glancing at her phone, checking comments perhaps. Right, Margaret? I always know where I stand, I replied, keeping my tone gentle. That part was true. I knew exactly where I stood. I stood in a house partly financed by my savings. I stood as trustee of the college fund Daniel asked me to manage because he said I was better with details. I stood as co-signer on a mortgage that still carried my name in careful black ink. Unbearable. I considered the weight of that word against the weight of what I carried quietly. The turkey platter circled back to me. More white meat? Daniel asked without meeting my eyes. Just a small slice, I said. I have always preferred smaller portions. They are easier to digest. Outside, November wind rattled the last leaves from the maple tree in the front yard. Inside, candles flickered and wine glasses clinked and conversation resumed as if nothing significant had been said. I folded my napkin neatly in my lap and let the moment pass over me like a wave that never quite crashes. If I was unbearable, I thought, then perhaps it was time to relieve them of the burden. I reached for my phone beneath the tablecloth, unseen, and typed a brief message to a number I had saved years ago. Just in case. The rest of the evening unfolded with the smoothness of something rehearsed. Plates were cleared, pie was sliced into careful wedges, and Olivia angled her phone to capture what she called candid family moments. I carried dishes to the sink and listened to the soft murmur of comments drifting from her screen. "You are so lucky to have everyone together," someone wrote. "Your mother-in-law looks sweet," another added, followed by a laughing emoji that suggested they had heard the earlier toast. Olivia read a few comments aloud, choosing only the flattering ones. I rinsed cranberry sauce from porcelain and thought about how easily stories are shaped by the person holding the camera. Daniel stood beside me for a moment, drying a plate with a dish towel that had once belonged to me. "She was just joking," he said quietly, still not looking directly at me. "You know how she is." I turned off the faucet and dried my hands. "I know exactly how she is," I replied, keeping my voice calm. He shifted his weight as though the tile floor had grown uncomfortable. "Let us not make this bigger than it is," he added. Bigger than it is. That phrase lingered. The house buzzed with conversation behind us, forks tapping against plates, the smell of pumpkin pie thick in the air. I had learned over the years that when someone says "do not make it bigger," they are often asking you to make yourself smaller. I returned to the dining room carrying a tray of coffee cups. Olivia was explaining to her coworker how exhausting it could be to manage extended family expectations. "Boundaries are important," she said brightly. "Especially with mothers-in-law who do not know when to step back." A few heads nodded in sympathetic rhythm. I set the tray down gently so the porcelain would not clatter. "Coffee?" I asked, as if I had not heard. Ethan tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, can I show you my room?" he asked. "Of course," I said, grateful for the interruption. His bedroom was at the end of the hallway, decorated in blue and gray with a bookshelf I had assembled myself one Saturday afternoon when Daniel said he was too busy with work. Ethan closed the door behind us and lowered his voice. "Mom was not being nice," he said with the seriousness only children can carry without disguise. I sat on the edge of his bed. "Sometimes grown-ups forget that jokes still have weight," I told him. He considered that. "Are you going to be mad?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "No. I am going to remember." He accepted that answer with a nod and began showing me a drawing he had made of a rocket ship. As he explained the engines and the fuel tanks, I felt something steady inside me settle into place. I had spent years being accommodating, adjusting my visits to their schedule, contributing quietly when they fell short, stepping back when asked. Each accommodation had seemed harmless. Together, they had built a pattern. When I returned to the kitchen, the live stream had ended. Olivia was scrolling through saved clips, trimming and editing. "We got almost 300 viewers," she announced proudly. "People love authenticity." I watched her thumb glide across the screen, deciding which moments deserved to remain. I wondered if the word unbearable would make the final cut. Daniel poured himself another cup of coffee. "Mom, do you want to stay the night?" he asked, as though offering generosity. It was a 20-mile drive back to my house, a drive I had made countless times in rain and snow. "I will head home," I said. "I have an early morning." That was true. Early mornings have a way of clarifying priorities. Olivia hugged me at the door, her embrace light and performative. "You know we love you," she said into my shoulder. We just need space to build our own traditions. I stepped back and looked at her carefully. Traditions are built on foundations, I said softly. I hope yours is strong. She blinked, uncertain whether that was agreement or warning. Outside, the air had turned crisp, the kind that carries the promise of winter. I walked to my car and paused before opening the door, glancing back at the house glowing warmly behind me. Through the window I could see Daniel laughing at something on his phone while Olivia leaned into him, reviewing footage from the evening. The red maple in the yard stood nearly bare now, branches outlined against the darkening sky. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, shutting out the noise. My phone vibrated gently in my purse. A reply had arrived to the message I had sent beneath the tablecloth earlier. It was brief and professional, exactly as I expected. We can review everything tomorrow at 9, it read. I started the engine and let the heater warm the air. Unbearable. I repeated the word once more in my mind, testing its edges. It no longer felt sharp. It felt useful. I signaled, pulled out of the driveway, and drove toward home, already considering what it means to relieve someone of a burden they never understood they were carrying. At 9 o'clock the next morning I sat across from Harold Bennett in his quiet office overlooking Main Street, the kind of office with framed degrees on the wall and a clock that ticks loudly enough to remind you that time is always moving whether you are ready or not. Harold had handled my late husband's estate 6 years ago, and he remembered the details without needing to shuffle through a thick file. You sounded composed on the phone, he said, folding his hands on the desk. Composed does not mean inactive, I replied. He gave a small nod, the kind professionals use when they recognize resolve. I laid out the structure as it currently stood. My name remained on the mortgage as co-signer. The college trust for Ethan listed me as primary trustee with discretionary authority. There was also a family investment account Daniel had asked me to oversee when markets grew volatile 2 years ago. I had agreed because he said he trusted my judgment. Harold reviewed the documents carefully. Nothing has changed legally, he confirmed. You still hold significant control. Control. It was not a word I had used in years. I had preferred support, help, contribution. Control implied leverage. If someone believes you are a burden, Harold continued gently, you are under no obligation to continue carrying financial responsibility. I watched sunlight move slowly across the polished wood of his desk. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, ordinary life proceeding without drama. I do not want conflict, I said. I want clarity. He slid a yellow legal pad toward me. Then we begin with boundaries in writing, he suggested. We discussed options. Removing my name from the mortgage would require formal notice and a refinance within 90 days. Adjusting the trust would involve revising distribution timelines and performance conditions. Everything was legal. Everything was measured. No raised voices. No accusations. Just signatures and dates. Are you certain? Harold asked finally. Once initiated, it sends a message. I thought of Olivia's glass raised in that warm dining room, of 300 viewers tapping hearts on a screen. I thought of Daniel drying plates without meeting my eyes. The message has already been sent, I answered. I am simply responding. By 10:30 I had signed preliminary paperwork requesting a review of all accounts and initiating the process to remove myself as financial guarantor. Harold promised to draft formal notices by the end of the week. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the air carried that late November chill that settles into your coat sleeves. I drove home slowly, passing the elementary school where Ethan would soon return after the holiday break. Children deserve stability, I reminded myself. Stability built on honesty, not performance. My house greeted me with its familiar quiet. The porch swing creaked softly in the breeze. Inside, I hung my coat and placed my purse on the hall table Daniel once used for his homework. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat by the living room window. There was no anger in me. Only alignment. Around noon my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said, his tone casual but edged with something uncertain. "Did you get home safely?" "I did," I replied. "Thank you." A pause followed. "Olivia thinks maybe the joke landed wrong," he added. "She did not mean anything by it." I looked out at the maple tree in my yard, branches bare and honest against the sky. "Words always mean something," I said calmly. "Even when people pretend they do not." He exhaled. "Can we just move past it?" There it was again. Move past it. As though dignity were a minor inconvenience blocking the hallway. "We will move forward," I said. "But forward is not the same as past." Silence stretched between us. I could hear Olivia's voice faintly in the background asking who he was speaking to. "Mom," Daniel began carefully, "you know we are grateful for everything you have done." Gratitude spoken in theory is different from gratitude practiced in behavior. "I hope so," I answered. "Because changes are coming." He stilled. "What kind of changes?" I took another sip of coffee before replying. "Responsible ones." I did not elaborate. "Not yet." "You are not upset, are you?" he asked, almost pleading. I considered the question honestly. "No," I said. "I am attentive." After we hung up, I placed the phone face down on the table and allowed the quiet to settle again. The paperwork would take days to formalize, weeks to execute. But the decision had already shifted something fundamental. Unbearable was a label. Trustee was a title. Guarantor was a responsibility. I had carried each role differently. Now I would choose which ones remained. Outside, a single leaf loosened from the maple branch and drifted down to the grass. I watched it land without sound and understood that sometimes the most significant changes happen without spectacle, without raised voices, without anyone realizing the ground beneath them has quietly begun to move. By Friday afternoon the first draft of the formal notices arrived in my email inbox, precise and unemotional, lines of legal language that read like quiet footsteps across a wooden floor. I printed them on cream paper and laid the pages side by side on my dining room table, the same table where Daniel had once practiced spelling words while his father quizzed impatiently. The house was still, the refrigerator humming softly in the kitchen, the clock above the mantel marking each second without urgency. I read every sentence carefully. Notice of intent to withdraw as co-guarantor. Request for full accounting of trust assets. Revision of discretionary authority pending review. There were no sharp edges in the wording. No accusations. Only structure. I placed my reading glasses on the table and let my gaze drift toward the framed photograph of Daniel at age 12, holding a fishing rod almost taller than he was, grinning beside his father on a bright July morning. Back. Then, gratitude was simple. If he needed help tying a knot, he asked. If he fell short on allowance, he admitted it. Somewhere along the way, assistance had become entitlement disguised as humor. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Olivia. I let it ring once before answering. "Margaret," she said brightly, her tone rehearsed, "I just wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings about Thanksgiving." I folded the top page neatly and aligned the corners with care. "Feelings are rarely hard," I replied. "They are simply accurate." A small laugh floated through the receiver. "You know I tease because I feel comfortable," she continued. "That is how my family shows love." I glanced at the printed words on the paper in front of me. "Love does not require an audience," I said gently. There was a pause long enough for her to notice. "Daniel mentioned you said changes were coming," she added, the brightness thinning. "What did you mean by that?" I reached for a pen and signed my initials at the bottom of the first page, testing how the ink settled into the fibers. "I meant I am reviewing my responsibilities," I answered. "At my age, clarity matters." Her voice tightened slightly. "We have always appreciated everything you have done." Appreciation expressed after discomfort carries a different weight. "I am glad," I said. "Then you will understand." She did not respond immediately. In the background I could hear cabinet doors opening and closing, the familiar sounds of the kitchen I had helped furnish. "Are we in some kind of trouble?" she asked finally. "Trouble." The word hung between us. "Not if you are prepared," I said calmly. "Prepared for what?" "For independence," I replied. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything said at the Thanksgiving table. "Daniel will call you," she said at last, her tone now measured. "I think we should all sit down and talk." "We will," I agreed. "After you receive something in the mail." I ended the call before explanations could dilute the clarity forming inside me. I gathered the signed pages into a neat stack and slid them into a large envelope. The address of the mortgage lender looked stark against the white paper. I sealed it carefully and set it by the door, alongside a second envelope addressed to Daniel and Olivia directly. Outside, the afternoon light had begun to fade earlier than it had in summer, shadows stretching long across the lawn. I put on my coat and drove to the post office 2 miles away, the heater humming steadily. Inside, the line was short. An elderly man ahead of me mailed a package wrapped in brown paper and twine. Ordinary errands. Ordinary lives. When it was my turn, I placed both envelopes on the counter. "Certified mail," I said. The clerk stamped each one with practiced efficiency. The sound of the stamp landing on paper echoed faintly in my ears, final and clean. Back in my car, I sat for a moment before turning the key. There was no surge of adrenaline. No trembling hands. Only a quiet awareness that something had shifted from thought into action. At home, I placed the certified receipts in a small wooden box where I keep important documents, alongside my husband's watch and the deed to this house. The maple tree outside stood bare now, branches unadorned and honest. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea and carried the mug to the window, watching the sky darken into deep blue. Daniel would receive his notice within 2 days. The lender would respond within the week. Numbers would be recalculated. Deadlines would be set. Refinancing would become necessary. All of it straightforward. All of it legal. I thought again of Olivia's toast, the easy laughter, the glowing phone screen capturing curated gratitude. Some words are meant to diminish. Others are meant to define. I chose mine carefully. I was not unbearable. I was accountable. And accountability, once activated, moves quietly but without hesitation. The certified letters were delivered on Monday just after noon. I knew the timing because I checked the tracking numbers with the same calm attention I once gave to baking temperatures and school calendars. At 12:47, the status changed to delivered and signed. I imagined the envelope resting on their kitchen counter, the bold type of the return address impossible to ignore. I did not have to wait long. My phone rang at 1:15. Daniel did not begin with a greeting. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, his voice tight, no longer casual. I was seated at my dining table with a notepad open in front of me, a pen aligned neatly along the margin. "It is a notice," I said evenly. "A responsible one." I could hear Olivia in the background, her voice lower but urgent, asking what the lender letter meant. Daniel covered the receiver briefly, then returned. "You are withdrawing from the mortgage?" he asked. I let a second pass before answering. "Yes." Silence filled the space between us, heavy and unpolished. "You cannot just do that," he said finally. "We have payment structured around your guarantee." The phrasing interested me. Structured around your guarantee. Not around our income. Not around our savings. Around my stability. "That is precisely why I can," I replied. "My name is on the document. It is my responsibility to manage it." His breathing grew uneven, not dramatic, just unsettled. "This is because of Thanksgiving," he said, searching for a smaller explanation. "This is because of patterns," I corrected gently. In the background I heard the distinct rustle of paper, perhaps the second envelope being opened now. Olivia's tone shifted from confusion to alarm. "Daniel, read the other one," she whispered, though not softly enough. Daniel exhaled sharply. You are also reviewing the trust, he said, disbelief creeping into his words. Ethan's trust. I closed my eyes briefly, picturing my grandson's blue and gray bedroom, the bookshelf I had assembled with a screwdriver and steady hands. I am reviewing all accounts under my name, I said. That includes the trust. You would not punish him, Daniel said quickly. There it was. The assumption of punishment. I am not punishing anyone, I replied. I am clarifying expectations. Olivia's voice rose now, more direct. This is extreme, Margaret, she called out from wherever she stood. Over a joke. I adjusted the notepad in front of me, though I had not written anything yet. Words reveal perspective, I said. Perspective informs behavior. Behavior has consequences. There was a pause, then Daniel's voice returned, lower and more cautious. What do you want? He asked. It was the first honest question of the afternoon. I considered it carefully. I want respect that does not require a spotlight, I answered. I want acknowledgement that support is a privilege, not a permanent entitlement. On the other end of the line, silence settled in layers. I imagined them standing in the kitchen, the quartz countertops reflecting light, the maple cabinets I helped select now witnessing a different kind of conversation. We cannot refinance in 90 days, Daniel said after a moment. Interest rates are higher. Now. The payments will increase. His voice carried real concern, stripped of performance. Then you will need to adjust your budget, I replied. As adults do. Olivia stepped closer to the phone. You are destabilizing our family, she said, her tone controlled but strained. I thought of the live stream, of the laughter, of the word unbearable floating through digital space. Stability built on dependency is fragile, I said calmly. True stability stands on its own. Another silence. This one longer. Finally Daniel spoke again. Can we meet? He asked. The question was no longer defensive. It was practical. Yes, I said. We can meet on Sunday afternoon at my house. I chose my house deliberately. Just us? He asked. Just us, I confirmed. After we ended the call, I remained seated at the table for several minutes, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the mantel clock. My hands were steady. There was no triumph in me. Only alignment. The paperwork would continue moving through channels regardless of emotion. 90 days was a clear timeline. The trust review would require documentation and revised conditions, not cancellation but structure. Everything measured. Everything deliberate. I stood and walked to the window. The maple tree outside was completely bare now, branches reaching upward without decoration. Winter does not announce itself with drama. It arrives gradually, stripping away excess until only the essential remains. I had spent years cushioning my son from discomfort, smoothing transitions, absorbing tension so that his household could feel secure. But security without accountability had quietly transformed into expectation. Unbearable was a word chosen lightly at a table full of witnesses. Responsibility was a word chosen carefully in a quiet office with signatures and stamps. On Sunday, we would sit across from one another without live streams or curated captions. There would be no audience to soften the edges. Only clarity, measured in mortgage documents and trust agreements, and the simple question of what kind of foundation a family truly stands on. Sunday arrived with a pale gray sky and a thin layer of frost clinging to the edges of my front lawn. I woke before sunrise, not from anxiety but from habit. I brewed coffee, set out 3 mugs on the dining table, and placed a small plate of store-bought oatmeal cookies in the center. Nothing elaborate. Nothing symbolic. Just hospitality without performance. At 2 o'clock sharp, Daniel's sedan pulled into the driveway. I watched from the living room window as he stepped out first, shoulders slightly rounded, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. Olivia followed a moment later, her posture upright, her movements precise. They walked up the path side by side but not touching. I opened the door before they knocked. Come in, I said. The warmth of the house met the chill they carried in with them. We moved to the dining table, the same one where Daniel once practiced spelling words and where I had reviewed legal notices only days earlier. No phones were placed on the surface. That was deliberate. Daniel cleared his throat. We read everything, he began. Olivia folded her hands in front of her. We think this is disproportionate, she said carefully. I poured coffee into each mug, the steady stream filling the quiet. Disproportionate to what? I asked. Daniel looked at me directly for the first time since Thanksgiving. To a comment, he said. I slid the sugar bowl toward them, though neither reached for it. This is not about a comment, I replied. It is about a pattern of positioning me as optional while depending on me as essential. The words settled heavily between us. Olivia exhaled. We never saw you as optional, she said. I tilted my head slightly. At the Thanksgiving table, you introduced me as unbearable, I reminded her. In front of guests. In front of your online audience. Her jaw tightened. It was humor, she insisted. It was branding. The choice of word caught my attention. Branding. Families are not brands, I said softly. Daniel rubbed his temples. We have been under pressure, he admitted. Mortgage rates, school expenses, work stress. The joke was thoughtless. Thoughtless. I considered that. Thoughtless does not mean harmless, I said. And support without gratitude becomes assumption. Olivia leaned forward slightly. So you are removing your name to teach us a lesson? She asked. I met her gaze evenly. I am removing my name because it is my responsibility to align my commitments with my treatment, I answered. Lessons are optional. Alignment is necessary. Daniel looked down at his hands. We cannot refinance easily, he said. The new rate will increase our monthly payment by nearly $800. I had reviewed the numbers already. Then adjustments will be required, I said. That is part of adulthood. Olivia's voice softened, almost shifting into persuasion. Ethan will feel this, she said. We were planning summer programs for him. I pictured my grandson carefully explaining the engines on his rocket drawing. Ethan's trust remains intact, I replied. But it will include revised conditions emphasizing responsibility and mutual respect. Daniel looked up sharply. Conditions? I nodded once. Nothing punitive. Clear expectations about transparency and communication. Funds are a resource, not an entitlement. The word entitlement lingered. Olivia sat back in her chair, the polished confidence from Thanksgiving replaced with calculation. What do you need from us? She asked finally, the same question Daniel had posed earlier in the week. I folded my hands on the table. I need acknowledgement, I said. Not of money. Of contribution. I need respect expressed privately and publicly. I need clarity that I am not a convenient guarantee. Daniel swallowed. We are sorry, he said quietly. It was the first apology without qualification. Olivia hesitated, then added, I am sorry for the way I framed it. Framed. The language of presentation again. I studied her face, searching not for emotion but for intention. An apology is a beginning, I said. Trust is rebuilt through behavior. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking the seconds of their silence. Daniel nodded slowly. If we commit to changing how we communicate, he asked, will you reconsider the mortgage withdrawal? I took a measured breath. The process has already begun, I said. However, I am willing to review timelines if genuine effort is demonstrated. Olivia's shoulders lowered slightly. What does genuine look like to you? She asked. I thought carefully. No public humor at my expense, I said. No private minimization of my role. Transparent financial planning without assuming my involvement. Daniel nodded again. That is fair, he said. Olivia did not speak immediately, but she did not object. The frost outside had melted by now, sunlight touching the bare branches of the maple tree. We sat there for another half hour, discussing practical steps rather than emotions. Refinancing options. Budget adjustments. Trust documentation. The conversation was not warm, but it was honest. When they stood to leave, Daniel paused at the door. I did not realize how much we were leaning, he admitted quietly. I met his eyes. Leaning is not wrong, I said. Forgetting you are leaning is. Olivia offered. A small nod before stepping onto the porch. I watched them walk back to their car, not side by side this time but with a careful space between them, perhaps considering foundations in a new light. I closed the door gently and returned to the dining table. 3 mugs sat half empty. The cookies remained mostly untouched. There was no celebration in me, no satisfaction. Only steadiness. Alignment does not roar. It settles. And in that quiet house, beneath the ticking clock and the bare branches outside, I felt the balance shift from assumption to awareness. In the weeks that followed our Sunday meeting, something subtle shifted in the rhythm of our interactions. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just enough to be noticeable. Daniel began sending detailed summaries of their budget revisions without being prompted, outlining projected refinancing scenarios and estimated monthly adjustments down to the nearest dollar. The numbers were tighter now. $800 more each month meant fewer dinners out, postponed renovations, a reconsideration of summer camps. He did not complain about it. He presented the figures plainly, as though finally recognizing that transparency was not a burden but a bridge. Olivia's communication changed as well, though in a different tone. She sent a message one afternoon asking if I would like to attend Ethan's school science showcase. There was no emoji. No performance. Just the date and time. I replied that I would be there. On the evening of the showcase, I arrived 10 minutes early and took a seat in the second row of the elementary school cafeteria, folding chairs arranged in neat lines beneath fluorescent lights. Poster boards lined the walls, each one carefully lettered in bright markers. Ethan stood beside his display about renewable energy, his explanation memorized and earnest. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way that required no translation. "Grandma, you came," he said. "Of course," I answered. Daniel stood nearby, hands clasped in front of him. Olivia was speaking to another parent but glanced over and offered a small nod in my direction. No introduction. No commentary. Just acknowledgement. After Ethan finished explaining wind turbines and solar panels, Daniel approached me quietly. "We met with the lender," he said. "The new rate will increase our payment by $762 each month. We are adjusting." I studied his expression. There was strain, yes, but also ownership. "Adjustment builds resilience," I replied. He nodded. "I see that now." Olivia joined us, holding Ethan's poster board carefully by the edges. "I have been thinking about Thanksgiving," she said, her voice lower than usual. The cafeteria noise hummed around us, children laughing, chairs scraping across tile. "I framed you as a caricature," she continued. "That was unfair." It was not a dramatic apology. It was deliberate. I held her gaze. "Public words require public correction," I said gently. She hesitated only briefly. "I posted something," she said. "Not about the mortgage. Just about gratitude. About learning that humor should not diminish." I had seen the post earlier that day. No names. No confessions. Just a paragraph about growth and accountability. It was subtle, but it existed. "That is a start," I replied. The trust documents were revised the following week. I retained my role as trustee but added structured annual reviews and mandatory financial planning sessions for Daniel and Olivia to attend. The funds remained intact for Ethan's education, untouched and secure. Harold Bennett finalized the amendments without drama. When Daniel signed the updated documents in my dining room, he did so without argument. I did not realize how quickly support becomes invisible, he admitted. I poured him coffee, the familiar ritual grounding the moment. Invisibility is comfortable, I said. Until it is not. The refinancing process moved forward steadily. Their monthly payment would rise, but their names would stand alone on the document. My name would be removed once the new terms were executed. There was no ceremony in that decision. Only paperwork. One afternoon, Olivia stopped by unexpectedly with a small container of homemade soup. She stood on the porch, hands wrapped around the warm lid. I know this does not erase anything, she said. But I wanted to bring something without needing anything in return. I stepped aside to let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising between us. There was no live stream. No audience. Just two women measuring one another differently than before. Respect is quieter than attention, I said at one point. She nodded slowly. I am learning the difference. Outside, the maple tree remained bare, winter settling in fully now. The air carried a sharper edge, but the house felt balanced. I no longer carried their financial weight. They no longer carried the illusion that my support was automatic. The shift was not about dominance. It was about definition. At the next family dinner, there were no toasts at my expense. Conversation moved easily between work schedules and school projects. When Daniel refilled my glass of water, he met my eyes and said, "Thank you for coming." It was a simple sentence, but it held substance. Unbearable had been spoken lightly across a crowded table weeks earlier. Now silence held a different kind of meaning. It was not avoidance. It was awareness. And awareness, once introduced, rarely retreats. By early spring the refinancing was complete. Daniel sent me a copy of the final confirmation email from the lender, the subject line reading "New loan terms approved." The new monthly payment was higher, the interest rate less forgiving, but the document carried only two names now. Mine was absent. I studied the attachment for a long moment before closing it, not with regret but with recognition. Independence looks different on paper. It stands alone. A week later Daniel invited me over for dinner again, this time without a holiday attached to it. Just Wednesday. Just spaghetti and salad and garlic bread warming in the oven. I arrived at 6:30 and noticed small differences immediately. The dining table was set without extravagance, no polished silverware, no staged centerpieces. Olivia greeted me at the door without a camera in her hand. "We are glad you are here," she said simply. No embellishment. No performance. During dinner, conversation moved easily between Ethan's upcoming math test and Daniel's new project at work. There were no pointed jokes. No subtle positioning. When Ethan spilled a bit of sauce on the tablecloth, Olivia reached for a napkin and cleaned it without irritation. "Accidents happen," she said calmly. I watched her carefully, not suspicious but attentive. Growth is often quiet. Halfway through the meal Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, I wanted to show you something," he said. He walked to the kitchen counter and returned with a printed spreadsheet. "We started a separate emergency fund," he explained, placing the paper in front of me. 3 months of expenses so far. We plan to reach 6 by the end of the year. The numbers were modest but deliberate. I traced the columns with my eyes. "That is responsible," I said. He nodded. "We realized we relied on you as a safety net without acknowledging it." Olivia added softly, "We are learning to build our own." After dinner we moved to the living room. The maple tree outside was beginning to show small green buds, early signs of renewal. Ethan brought out a board game and insisted that we all play. As we sat on the carpet rolling dice and moving pieces across cardboard squares, I noticed something that had not been present months earlier. Ease. Not the ease of assumption, but the ease of earned balance. Later, as Daniel walked me to my car, he paused beside the driveway. "I was embarrassed," he admitted quietly. "Not because of the mortgage. Because I did not defend you. The porch light cast a soft glow across his face, older now than the boy in the fishing photograph but still recognizable. Defense is not always loud, I said. Sometimes it is simply choosing not to laugh. He absorbed that without argument. I will remember, he said. In the weeks that followed, Olivia posted less about family gatherings. When she did share something online, the tone shifted. Gratitude was directed broadly, not selectively. There were no caricatures. No sharp humor. One afternoon she called to ask my opinion about a budgeting app she was considering. The request was practical, not dependent. I gave my thoughts and ended the call without feeling drained. The trust review meeting took place in late March. Harold Bennett joined us in my dining room, documents neatly arranged. Daniel and Olivia signed the revised conditions without resistance. The clauses emphasized transparency, annual reviews, and shared responsibility. Ethan's education remained secure. When the final page was signed, Harold gathered his papers and offered a small professional nod. Clarity prevents confusion, he said. After he left, we stood in the quiet room for a moment. Olivia spoke first. I did not understand how much influence words carry, she said. Especially when there is an audience. I met her eyes. Influence can build or erode, I replied. The choice is deliberate. She nodded slowly. Outside, the maple tree's buds were more visible now, tiny green points against dark branches. Change does not erase the past. It grows alongside it. At our next family dinner, there were no grand toasts. Instead, Daniel lifted his glass briefly and said, "To growth." It was understated. Honest. I lifted mine in return. The word unbearable had once echoed across a Thanksgiving table, light and careless. Now it existed only as a reminder of a line that should never have been crossed. The foundation beneath this family felt different, not because it was softer, but because it was understood. I no longer carried what was not mine to hold. They no longer leaned without noticing. And in that shared awareness, something steadier than pride settled into place. By the time summer settled in, the maple tree outside my window was full again, leaves thick and green, casting patterned shadows across the lawn in the late afternoon light. It had been nearly 7 months since Thanksgiving, nearly 7 months since a single word had exposed the imbalance none of us had wanted to name. The mortgage was entirely in Daniel and Olivia's names now. Their emergency fund had grown to 4 months of expenses. The trust reviews were scheduled on the calendar without resistance. The changes had not been dramatic. They had been consistent. One evening in early July, Daniel invited me to a small backyard gathering. Not a holiday. Not a performance. Just grilled chicken, lemonade, and a few neighbors standing around a folding table beneath string lights. I arrived with a bowl of fruit salad and no expectation of spectacle. Olivia greeted me with an easy smile. "We are glad you are here," she said, steady and unforced. Daniel took the bowl from my hands and set it beside the lemonade dispenser. There were no cameras propped against cups. No red recording light blinking from a countertop. Ethan ran across the yard and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Grandma, look at the garden Dad built," he said, pulling me toward a small row of raised beds along the fence. Daniel followed behind us. "We started growing some vegetables," he explained. Trying to be a little more self-sufficient. I knelt beside the tomatoes, their green skins just beginning to deepen toward red. "That takes patience," I said. "So does everything worth keeping." He nodded, understanding the layers beneath the sentence. As dusk approached, Daniel tapped a glass lightly with a spoon. It was not loud, not attention-seeking. Just enough to gather the small group's awareness. "I want to say something," he began, glancing briefly at Olivia before looking toward me. "Last Thanksgiving I made the mistake of letting a joke stand that should have been corrected. I did not correct it. That was wrong." The neighbors listened politely, unsure of the history but respectful of the tone. "We have learned a lot this year about independence and appreciation," he continued. "And about not taking support for granted." His eyes met mine directly. There was no defensiveness there now. Only acknowledgement. Olivia stepped forward slightly. "We are grateful," she said simply. No branding. No framing. Just 2 words delivered without decoration. I did not need more than that. I lifted my glass of lemonade. "Growth is not comfortable," I said calmly. "But it is necessary." The conversation resumed easily after that, drifting back to weather and school schedules and summer plans. Later, as the guests filtered out and the string lights glowed softly against the darkening sky, Daniel walked me toward my car once more. "I do not ever want you to feel small in this family," he said quietly. The sentence held weight because it was no longer reactive. It was chosen. "Then do not allow anyone to make you small either," I replied. "Balance goes both ways." He smiled faintly. "I understand." Driving home, windows cracked open to the warm July air, I thought about the journey from that Thanksgiving table to this quiet evening under string lights. The word unbearable had once been offered lightly, almost playfully, but it had revealed something foundational. Not cruelty. Not hatred. Just complacency. Complacency that had grown comfortable leaning without noticing the weight being carried. Removing my name from the mortgage had not fractured the family. It had clarified it. Revising the trust had not punished anyone. It had defined expectations. Respect, once made visible, had taken root in ways louder apologies never could. When I pulled into my driveway, the maple tree cast a wide shadow across the lawn, steady and full. I sat in the car for a moment before turning off the engine, listening to the quiet hum fade. I did not feel victorious. Victory implies opposition. What I felt was alignment. I was no longer positioned as a guarantee disguised as a guest. I was present by choice, not by obligation. The foundation beneath us now rested on transparency rather than assumption. And if anyone ever raised a glass again, I knew the words would be chosen carefully, not because they feared consequence, but because they understood weight. In the end, I was never unbearable. I was necessary. The difference is subtle until someone decides to test it. Once tested, it becomes unmistakable.